Ever feel like everyone else seems to have mastered this game of power and strategy? Well, get ready to level up, because today we're diving into the world of Machiavelli.
Ah, Machiavelli. You really can't talk about power dynamics without bumping into him, can you?
Definitely not. We're tackling his big ones today, The Prince and the Art of War, and we're going beyond the surface level.
Absolutely. We're digging into the good stuff, the stuff that's shockingly relevant even today.
So buckle up, everyone. This is going to be a wild ride. Now, I gotta admit, it's been a while since my college days. So for those of us who haven't exactly cracked open The Prince recently, who is this Machiavelli guy?
Well, imagine 16th century Italy. It's a viper's nest of these city-states all vying for power. And Machiavelli, he was right in the thick of it.
Not as a ruler himself, though, right?
Right. No, not quite a prince. More like this, well, political advisor.
Yeah.
He had a front row seat to how power really worked, how quickly things could change.
And Italy back then really was like a real-life Game of Thrones, wasn't it? All those competing rulers, the alliances, the betrayals.
Oh, absolutely. It was the perfect setting for someone like Machiavelli to come along and say, hey, let's talk about how this power thing really works, not how we wish it worked.
And that's where The Prince comes in.
Bingo. This is his masterpiece.
But is it really this, like, how-to guide for ruthless rulers that everyone says it is?
It's definitely more nuanced than that, but Machiavelli doesn't shy away from the, shall we say, less savory aspects of leadership.
Yeah, he's got that line about how it's better to be feared than loved, which always makes me do a double take.
Right. It's definitely attention grabbing. But you got to remember the context. He's not saying you should, go out of your way to be cruel just for the heck of it.
So it's more about, like, projecting an aura of strength, of not being someone to be trifled with.
Exactly. It's about respect, even if that means, yeah, maybe a little fear mixed in. Because if you're too, shall we say, lovable, people might mistake that for weakness.
And someone's always waiting to exploit that weakness.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about this idea of fear and respect, but how did Machiavelli think a ruler should actually put these ideas into practice?
Well, he was a big fan of using historical figures to illustrate his points. He pointed to guys like, well, Caesar Borgia, for example.
Ah, Caesar Borgia. Now, there's a name that's synonymous with ambition, right? Didn't he almost manage to unify Italy?
He did. Borgia was ruthless, ambitious, and let's face it, probably not someone you'd want to play poker with. He was like Machiavelli's case study in, let's call it, effective leadership, even if his methods were a bit, flexible.
To put it mildly. But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Borgia, was it?
Nope. Even the most cunning strategists can't always control everything. When his dad, the Pope, died, Borgia lost his main backer, and, well, let's just say things didn't end so well for him.
So even Machiavelli, the master of realpolitik, would admit there's a limit to how much control we really have.
It seems so.
Yeah.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Agathocles. He's another figure Machiavelli talks about. But unlike Borgia, Agathocles is more of a cautionary tale.
How so?
Well, this guy was all about seizing power through brutality, through fear and violence. And while it worked in the short term, let's just say it wasn't exactly a recipe for long-term stability.
Yeah, I can see how that would backfire. People can only take so much before they revolt.
Exactly. Machiavelli was pragmatic, even when it came to ruthlessness. He understood that while fear could be a tool, it was a tool that could easily break in your hand if you weren't careful.
It's a good thing to keep in mind, even if we're not, aiming for world domination.
Absolutely. There's a reason people are still talking about Machiavelli centuries later.
Now, speaking of Machiavelli's enduring wisdom, he wasn't just a one-hit wonder with The Prince, was he?
Oh, not at all. We've got to talk about the art of war because it's so much more than just a military guide.
And I'm guessing it's not all about winning battles either, is it?
You know it. It gets into the really interesting stuff: leadership, strategy, morale, the things that make or break a state even in peacetime. One of the things that really jumps out in the art of war is Machiavelli's take on mercenary armies. He was not a fan.
Yeah, he seemed pretty down on mercenaries, which is interesting because they were, the go-to fighting force back then. So what was his problem with them?
He saw them as a recipe for instability. They fought for money, not loyalty, which meant they could be bribed, they could switch sides, and they weren't invested in the long-term well-being of the state.
Sounds like a liability waiting to happen.
Exactly. He thought relying on mercenaries was basically outsourcing your security and then hoping for the best.
Not exactly a winning strategy. So if mercenaries were a no-go, who did Machiavelli think should be doing the fighting?
Citizen armies, he believed in them passionately.
He was a big fan of the citizen-soldier ideal, wasn't he? Like the ancient Romans.
Exactly. He saw citizens fighting for their homeland as the backbone of a strong state.
Makes sense. I mean, talk about motivation, right? It's your home, your family on the line.
Right. They're not just fighting for a paycheck, they're fighting for something they believe in. And Machiavelli saw the decline of citizen armies as a symptom of a bigger problem, the erosion of what he called civic virtue.
Civic virtue. Sounds a little old-fashioned today, but what did he mean by that?
It's about putting the common good above your own self-interest. It's about being willing to sacrifice to work together for the good of the community.
And he thought that was being lost in his time.
He did. He saw Italy becoming fragmented, focused on individual gain, and he worried that it would make them vulnerable.
So it's this idea that a society is only as strong as its citizens' willingness to pull together to fight for something larger than themselves.
That's it, exactly. And this idea of civic virtue, it ties into another key Machiavellian concept, fortuna, which is often translated as fortune.
Okay, so we're talking about luck, chance, fate, all that.
Exactly. Machiavelli believed that fortune played a major role in human affairs. But here's the key. He didn't think we were powerless against it.
So it's not just a matter of accepting whatever fate throws at you.
Not at all. He compared fortune to a raging river. Sometimes it floods and there's nothing you can do but try to survive. But in calmer times, you need to prepare, build defenses, so you're ready for the next flood.
So it's about being proactive, about anticipating challenges, not just reacting to them.
Precisely. He believed that while we can't always predict what fortune will bring, we can control how we respond. He argued that fortune favors the bold.
So you can't just sit back and wait for good things to happen. You have to make your own luck.
Exactly. He famously said, fortune is like a woman, and if you want to keep her under control, you need to be assertive.
Not sure that metaphor would fly today, but I get the point. Be bold, take charge, don't be passive.
Right. And he believed that even in the face of fortune's whims, we have agency, we can shape our own destinies, but it takes wit, courage, and a good understanding of how the world works.
Which brings us back to strategy, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about winning wars or just navigating life in general. And Machiavelli had some pretty interesting ideas about how to approach strategy, even when it came to seemingly mundane things, like, for instance, ditch digging.
Ah, yes, the ditches. Machiavelli's take on fortifications is a perfect example of his practical, detail-oriented side.
Because when I think master strategist, I don't usually picture someone elbow deep in a ditch.
Well, you see, he wasn't digging ditches for fun, this wasn't gardening. It was all carefully calculated, part of a bigger military strategy.
Okay, but I still don't get it. Aren't ditches like the oldest trick in the book? You dig a big hole, it keeps people out. So what was Machiavelli's big insight?
He flipped the script. Instead of outside, he wanted these ditches inside the city walls.
Inside. That seems a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
That was Machiavelli for you. Always thinking a step ahead. His logic was, if the enemy ever got over those outer walls, well, these inner ditches would slow them down, throw them off balance, buy time for the defenders.
Oh, so it's like a hidden trap. The invaders think they're in the clear, but boom, ditch.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how much Machiavelli valued practicality. He was all about adapting ancient wisdom to the realities of his time.
It's amazing, You've got these timeless ideas about strategy and power, but Machiavelli also brings it down to earth. Like, here's how you actually fortify a city. It's not all just high-minded philosophy.
He was definitely a big picture thinker, but he also knew the devil's in the details.
Totally. And you can see that in everything he wrote about city planning, economics, even public health. He understood that a strong state, a strong leader, it's about more than just brute force.
Yeah.
You got to sweat the small stuff, too.
He was a systems thinker, way ahead of his time.
Totally. But there's this other side to Machiavelli, right? We've talked about power, strategy, being ready for anything.
Yeah.
But he also talked about this idea of, what was it again?
Virtue. Virtue. One of his most important concepts. And yeah, it can be a little tricky to wrap our heads around.
Because when I hear virtue, I think, being a good person, which doesn't exactly scream Machiavelli.
Right. And it's not quite that simple. For Machiavelli, virtue wasn't just about morality. It was about having the skills, the strength, even the ruthlessness to overcome obstacles, to shape your own destiny.
So it's more about being effective than being nice.
That's a good way to put it. It's about having the guts to do what needs to be done, even if it's not always pleasant.
Because sometimes the world throws you a curveball and you got to be ready to swing back. Right?
Exactly. Virtue was Machiavelli's answer to the unpredictability of life. It's about seizing opportunities, adapting to change, and never ever giving up.
And the cool thing is, he believed anyone could cultivate this virtue. It wasn't some, like, innate quality that only a select few possessed.
He saw it as a skill to be honed through experience, through study, through facing down challenges.
It's a very empowering idea. It's like he's saying, hey, you have more control over your life than you think, even in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
That's the beauty of Machiavelli. He can be a bit intimidating, but there's also this underlying optimism there, this belief in human potential.
It's been amazing diving into all of this with you. So for our listeners who are now inspired to channel their inner Machiavelli, what's the key takeaway? If they only remember one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
I'd say this: the world is full of opportunities, but it's also full of traps. So study the game. Learn the rules, but don't be afraid to break them when you have to. Cultivate your virtue, your own unique blend of skills, knowledge, and courage, because that's what will help you navigate the game of life.
Love that. Embrace the chaos, be adaptable, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed ditch. Thanks for joining us on this Machiavellian adventure, everyone. And remember, fortune favors the bold.